From the beginning of Earth's oceanic history, long before the first civilizations took root along riverbanks or the earliest astronomers charted constellations in the night sky, an entire hidden world thrived beneath the crushing pressure of the deep, a world untouched by sunlight, guided only by ancient instincts, chemical whispers, and the faint glow of bioluminescent creatures that had mastered survival in conditions that would crush steel and freeze blood. But now, in an era defined by unprecedented human influence, this mysterious realm is stirring in a way that has baffled scientists, unsettled coastal communities, and awakened a profound realization about the changing state of our planet. For the deep, once silent, stable, immutable, is rising, and its creatures, shaped by millions of years of darkness, are appearing at the surface where they do not belong, sparking the urgent question, why now, and why with such frequency? To understand this unfolding drama, we must descend into the darkest corners of the ocean, into the midnight zone and the abyssal plains where pressure rises to 8 tons per square inch and temperatures barely hover above freezing, a world that has remained unchanged throughout ice ages, volcanic cataclysms, and continental shifts, and yet now, confronted by rapid global transformation, is showing signs of disruption everywhere. Strange, elongated oarfish washing onto beaches like shimmering omens, deep-sea anglerfish unexpectedly caught near the surface with their ghostly faces and needle-like teeth exposed to daylight, giant squid drifting closer to human reach, deep-water sharks, blobfish, gulper eels, and other rarely seen architects of the abyss rising higher, sometimes alive, sometimes dead, sometimes dying, but always sending a message that something is profoundly wrong in their ancient home, for the deep is not rising out of curiosity, it is rising out of crisis. The first and most powerful force behind this unprecedented migration is warming. The ocean, absorbing over 90% of global heat, is transforming not at the surface alone but throughout its massive vertical structure, with heat waves penetrating deeper each year, disturbing thermal refuges that once remained constant for millennia. Deep-sea creatures, perfectly adapted to extreme cold and intolerant of even minor changes, now face temperatures that provoke physiological shock, metabolic stress, and a breakdown of the delicate balances that govern their survival, forcing them to flee upward in search of cooler, more oxygen-rich waters, yet only to find that these upper layers hold dangers of their own, including predators, bright light, low pressure, and unfamiliar currents. As if heat alone were not enough, the second great force tightening its grip on the deep is deoxygenation, a silent, creeping suffocation triggered by warming, acidification, and stratification, the layering of waters that prevents oxygen from sinking into the abyss, creating dead zones and low oxygen corridors that cut through ecosystems like invisible wounds, leaving once thriving deep-sea communities gasping, disoriented, and displaced. For many species, the only escape from these suffocating layers is to move upward toward regions with higher oxygen content, even if doing so exposes them to an environment for which they were never designed. Compounding this crisis is the planetary reshaping of oceanic circulation, currents shifting, upwelling increasing in unusual places, and chaotic weather patterns driven by climate change such as intensified El Niño cycles, creating powerful vertical mixing events that physically carry deep organisms closer to the surface, sometimes alive and adapting, sometimes severely injured by rapid changes in pressure. their internal organs destabilized by forces they cannot withstand. Yet the story of deep-sea creatures rising is not one sculpted by climate alone. Human industry plays its part with a relentless intensity. Deep-sea mining, once considered science fiction, now tears through seafloor sediments, producing massive plumes that drift upward and outward for miles, disrupting habitats, clogging filter feeders, contaminating food webs, and sending shockwaves of ecological disturbance through the deep, while bottom trawling, one of the planet's most destructive fishing practices, drags weighted nets across seabeds, demolishing corals, capturing untargeted species, and hauling creatures upwards so quickly that their bodies rupture from barotrauma, their eyes bulging, organs expanding, and tissues damaged beyond repair, leaving them stranded on the surface or washed ashore, unrecognizable and unnatural to the human eye. Even above the waves, our influence reaches down. Underwater noise from shipping vessels, industrial drilling, and military sonar radiates deep into the oceanic column, disrupting communication, navigation, and feeding patterns of species that evolved to rely on faint vibrations and pressure gradients rather than vision, and artificial lights from fishing fleets, oil platforms, submersibles, and deep-sea drones pierce the darkness like alien intrusions, confusing animals that depend on darkness for hunting or hiding, pushing them away from their natural zones and sometimes pulling them upward toward the unfamiliar glow. In this changing world, some deep-sea creatures ascend not as an act of migration but as a consequence of immense physical strain. Volcanic activity under the seabed releases bursts of toxic chemicals or sudden heat pulses that force creatures to flee upward. Earthquakes disturb deep ecosystems. Underwater landslides propel animals upward through violent plumes, and ancient methane pockets erupt from the seafloor, altering water chemistry in ways that drive sensitive species away from their long-established shelters. Even deep-living fish that rely on stable pressure gradients become vulnerable when those gradients shift due to warming and stratification, leaving them disoriented and rising unintentionally, like travelers suddenly cut loose from gravity. Yet among all the forces at play, one of the most fascinating and alarming is the breakdown of the biological rhythms that have governed deep-sea life for countless generations. Many species perform diel vertical migrations, ascending at night to feed on plankton and descending by day to avoid predators. But as warming alters plankton distribution and shifts nutrient cycles, these migrations are thrown out of balance, with some species ascending too high or failing to descend properly due to weakened muscles, disease, or disrupted internal clocks, leaving them exposed to surface conditions they were never meant to survive. To the casual observer, these rising creatures may seem like isolated anomalies, rare, freakish events, but when seen through the lens of global change, they form a pattern as clear and unmistakable as a warning siren. The deep sea is losing its stability, its predictability, and its safety, and the creatures that inhabit it are revealing this truth through their sudden, dramatic, and often tragic appearance at the surface. The iconic oarfish, with its ribbon-like body stretching up to 30 feet, has become a symbol of these events, washing ashore in increasing numbers, sparking myths of sea serpents and natural disasters, yet its presence signals far more scientific realities: changes in midwater oxygen levels, disturbances from seismic activity, and the cascading effects of warming waters that push it upward in desperation. Similarly, the rare appearances of deep-sea anglerfish, with their bioluminescent lures and monstrous jaws, indicate stress or illness brought on by rising ocean temperatures and shifts in food availability, while sightings of giant squid near the surface often correspond with unusual current patterns or deep water turbulence that force them from their normal hunting grounds. And as these creatures rise, they reveal not only their own struggles but also the vulnerability of the deep-sea ecosystems that anchor the planet's climate systems. The mesopelagic zone alone holds an enormous biomass of carbon-transporting organisms whose nightly migrations help move carbon from surface waters to the abyss, regulating Earth's temperature and atmospheric balance. If these communities become destabilized by warming, deoxygenation, or food web collapse, the consequences ripple outward through global climate feedback loops, weakening one of the planet's most important climate buffers. Coastal communities, too, feel the impact as shifting deep-sea patterns influence surface fisheries, altering the availability of species like tuna, swordfish, anchovy, and sardine, with some populations collapsing due to disrupted food chains while others boom unpredictably, leaving fishermen uncertain, economies unstable, and ecosystems out of sync. And still, beneath all these consequences lies a deeper truth: the ocean's hidden world, once shielded from the rapid pace of environmental change, is no longer protected, no longer insulated, no longer immune to the forces reshaping the planet above, and its rising inhabitants are the ambassadors of that truth, sent not by choice but by necessity, by the unrelenting push of a world in flux. Their presence at the surface tells a story of warning, a story that demands attention before the deep reaches a tipping point from which it cannot return, for when the ancient stability of the deep collapses, the effects will echo across the entire ocean, the atmosphere, and the future of life on Earth. And so, as we watch these creatures wash ashore or drift near the surface with their otherworldly forms, strange lights, and prehistoric appearances, we must remember that they are not myths or omens. They are signals, messages, alarms rung by the oldest and most resilient creatures on the planet, telling us that the boundary between the world above and the world below is weakening, that the deep is being transformed in ways beyond our immediate sight, and that the creatures rising from its darkness carry with them the story of a planet undergoing profound and irreversible change, a story that challenges us to listen, to understand, and to act before the silent world beneath us is silenced forever. As we push deeper into this unfolding mystery of why the hidden titans of the abyss are rising toward the fragile surface world, we uncover yet another layer of this vast planetary transformation, for the deep ocean, once thought to be insulated from human impact, is now experiencing a cascade of disruptions that weave together into a single, powerful narrative of change, a narrative written not in words but in currents, temperatures, chemical signatures, and the silent struggle of creatures that have survived multiple mass extinctions yet now find themselves confronting forces they have never faced before, forces born from human hands, human machines, and human ambition. To understand this intrusion, we must journey through the shifting corridors of the ocean's vertical landscape, where ancient migratory patterns are being rewritten by environmental upheavals so vast that even the most resilient deep-sea dwellers can no longer maintain the rhythms that once guided their existence. For every night, billions of midwater creatures, lanternfish, squid, krill, siphonophores ascend toward the surface in the largest animal migration on Earth, a cosmic dance older than humanity itself, driven by hunger and survival. Yet now these migrations are being thrown out of sync by warming waters that accelerate metabolism, by declining oxygen that weakens muscle function, and by altered plankton populations that shift their feeding zones, creating chaos in a system that once operated with the precision of a natural clock. When these rhythms break, species that once rose only a few hundred feet now rise thousands, overshooting their natural boundaries and exposing themselves to surface conditions that overwhelm their biology, forcing them into a realm where pressure is too low, light too bright, and predators too numerous. These disruptions ripple upward into the food webs that sustain tuna, whales, sharks, and seabirds, creating feedback loops that further destabilize the oceanic balance, and as top predators shift their hunting patterns, they drive deep-sea organisms even higher, turning the upper ocean into a battleground where ancient roles are reversed and survival becomes a desperate improvisation. Meanwhile, massive underwater heat waves, once rare, now common, pulse through the midwater zones like invisible storms, sweeping through ecosystems with the same destructive force as wildfires on land, killing delicate gelatinous creatures, stunning fish adapted only to cold temperatures, and altering microbial communities that form the foundation of deep-sea life. When these heat waves intensify, they push entire assemblages of deep organisms upward in synchronized waves, creating sudden surges of unusual animals at the surface that appear to humans as mysterious invasions but in truth represent the frantic escape of life fleeing environmental disaster unfolding in slow motion beneath the waves. And then there are the chemical changes. As carbon dioxide dissolves into the ocean, it alters acidity levels, affecting everything from shell-forming organisms to the sensory systems of fish, disrupting their ability to detect predators, navigate currents, and locate food, creating a world where the deep sea's ancient signals chemical trails, pressure changes, vibrations no longer speak the same language, leaving its inhabitants lost in their own home and driving some upward out of confusion rather than intention. At the same time, deep-sea vents, those dramatic underworld chimneys that spew mineral-rich plumes and host ecosystems found nowhere else on Earth, are being influenced by shifting tectonic pressures and volcanic activity linked indirectly to melting ice sheets and changing sea levels, altering the stability of vent communities and sending shockwaves through creatures that rely on those chemical oases for survival. Some flee upward into the open ocean, where they are quickly overwhelmed, leaving researchers puzzled by their sudden surface appearances, while the true cause lies miles below, hidden from human eyes. In addition to natural disturbances magnified by climate change, the technological intrusion of humanity into the deep continues to intensify, with advanced submersibles, autonomous underwater vehicles, deep-sea drilling rigs, and mining machines generating unprecedented levels of noise, vibration, and light pollution that travel across immense distances underwater. Creatures that evolved in total darkness are suddenly confronted with blinding beams, mechanical drones humming through their territories, and sonar blasts capable of damaging delicate organs, driving them into panic-driven ascents that end at the surface as tragic symbols of a world colliding with one it was never meant to touch. Even the microplastics sinking into the abyss, tiny particles from clothing fibers, bottle fragments, fishing nets, and industrial waste have infiltrated the digestive systems of deep-sea species, weakening them from within, causing inflammation, deformities, and impaired buoyancy, which can disrupt their ability to regulate depth, leading to unintended ascents that bring them into regions where predators, sunlight, and temperature differences seal their fate. These countless threads of disruption intertwine into a single undeniable truth: the deep sea is no longer a sanctuary from the changing planet above, and the creatures rising from its depths are the living testimony of an ocean undergoing a silent revolution. Each strange appearance: a ghostly anglerfish floating near the surface at dawn, a colossal oarfish shimmering on the sand, a translucent gulper eel drifting in waters far too bright for its delicate skin, represents not an isolated oddity but a chapter in the unfolding story of a planet whose equilibrium is slipping, a signal from the deep that the ancient systems which once held the ocean in balance are unraveling. These creatures are the emissaries of upheaval, ambassadors of a world that cannot speak in human language but communicates through motion, displacement, and the haunting presence of animals where they should never be, and as they breach the boundary between the depths and the world above, they compel humanity to confront an uncomfortable truth: that the deep is no longer a distant, separate realm but an integral part of Earth's living engine, and its distress signals are our warning that the planet's most vital systems are shifting in ways we can no longer ignore. As this mystery deepens and we continue to unravel the immense forces that are pushing deep-sea creatures toward the fragile world above, we find ourselves confronting an even more profound truth about the ocean's hidden architecture and the delicate threads that bind its deepest realms to the fate of the surface world. Stability in the deep has always depended on a finely tuned balance of temperature, pressure, nutrients, and the ancient choreography of planetary cycles, but now, as human influence accelerates, those cycles are being thrown into confusion, and the consequences echo across a domain so vast that even small shifts produce monumental outcomes, rippling across thousands of miles and through ecosystems older than civilization itself. Consider the abyssal plains, those endless deserts of darkness where giant amphipods, brittle stars, sea cucumbers, and mysterious gelatinous forms drift like ghosts through the void, and imagine the impact when sediment clouds from deep-sea mining operations billow across their habitats, smothering filter feeders, altering chemical gradients, and releasing trapped carbon that has rested undisturbed for millennia, destabilizing not only the creatures that live there but the carbon cycle that regulates Earth's climate. And when these sediments rise through the water column, they often carry with them stunned or displaced organisms that find themselves drifting upward into zones they were never designed to enter, where pressure variations tear at their bodies and sunlight burns tissues that have evolved only for eternal night. Meanwhile, methane hydrates, frozen reserves of gas locked beneath the seafloor, are destabilizing as ocean temperatures rise, releasing sudden bursts of methane that alter water chemistry and can force deep-sea animals to flee rapidly, driving them up through the layers of the ocean like refugees escaping an unseen natural disaster. And in regions where underwater volcanic activity intensifies, chemical plumes rich in heavy metals and acidic compounds erupt into the deep-sea environment, poisoning creatures or forcing them into panic descents that bring them fatally close to the surface, where pressure differences overwhelm their physiology. In addition to these geological upheavals, biological invasions are now occurring in the deep sea as species that once remained confined to certain zones expand their territories in search of tolerable temperatures, triggering predator-prey chain reactions that displace entire communities and push some species upward into unfamiliar waters. Jellyfish blooms, for example, are expanding deeper and wider, depleting oxygen further and driving delicate species like deep-sea fish and cephalopods toward shallower regions where they are more easily observed by humans, creating the illusion of a sudden surge in bizarre sightings when in reality the creatures are fleeing an invisible war for resources in the depths. As these disturbances accumulate, the deep ocean's internal energy balance begins to shift, currents weaken or speed up, thermal layers sink or rise, nutrient fluxes change direction, and the entire vertical ecosystem becomes unstable, forcing creatures to make desperate vertical movements in search of new equilibrium. Some rise only a little before dying, others continue until they breach the surface, and still others are carried upward by rising plumes, internal waves, or collapsing thermoclines that act like underwater elevators, lifting entire patches of deep-sea ecology into the domain of light and observation. And yet, amidst all of this environmental chaos, perhaps the most alarming driver of deep-sea ascents is the collapse of food webs that once tethered species to specific depth zones. As warming accelerates, plankton communities shift distribution, nutrient cycles break down, and deep-dwelling organisms find their food supplies dwindling or migrating upward, forcing them to pursue prey into higher layers where they become trapped by unsuitable temperatures or predators. In turn, predators follow their prey upward, continuing a chain reaction that feeds even more unusual sightings at the surface, like a hidden cascade made visible only when its victims wash ashore. At the same time, diseases and parasites once kept in check by the cold stability of the deep are spreading as warming creates new conditions for pathogens to thrive, weakening deep-sea animals and impairing their buoyancy control, sometimes causing them to drift upward involuntarily in a state of confusion or near death, where they are found by fishermen, divers, or washed ashore on remote coastlines. And above all, we must recognize that the rising of these creatures is not merely a biological crisis, it is a sign of the deep ocean losing its silence, its rhythm, its ancient calm, a sign that the deepest part of Earth's living system is struggling under pressures that no natural cycle has ever imposed. Deep-sea creatures appearing at the surface are more than curiosities, more than viral moments on the internet. They are the final echoes of a world pushed to its limits, signals from the abyss warning us that the stability of the entire ocean is slipping. Their presence forces humanity to confront the uncomfortable reality that the deep, once considered untouchable and eternal, is now vulnerable, disturbed, and rising toward the light not out of choice but out of crisis, revealing that the planet's most ancient ecosystems are sending us a message written not in words but in their final desperate ascent toward a world they were never meant to enter.